I was 3 years old when my father walked out of our house for the last time. I don't remember his face that day. Don't remember if he said goodbye or if he just vanished like morning mist. What I do remember is the silence that followed, the way my mother's shoulders curved inward like broken wings, and how the sound of his car engine fading into the distance became the soundtrack to my childhood. My mother, Rebecca, never spoke badly of him. She would just get this distant look in her eyes whenever I asked about my father, as if she were staring at something far beyond the walls of our small apartment. "Some people aren't meant to stay, Daniel," she would say, her voice carrying a weight that seemed too heavy for her small frame. "That doesn't mean they don't love you." But love, I learned early, was a word that could be twisted into shapes that didn't fit. How could someone who loved you leave you behind like an unwanted piece of furniture? How could love be so easily discarded? I grew up in the spaces between his absence. Every father-son baseball game at school. Every Christmas morning when other kids talked about what their dads had gotten them. Every moment when someone asked about my family, and I had to explain that it was just me and my mom. Each instance carved a little deeper into the hollow place where a father's love should have lived. Rebecca worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. She cleaned offices at night and worked as a cashier during the day, her hands always smelling of industrial cleaner and disappointment. I would watch her count quarters for groceries, see her eyes dart to the clearance rack first whenever we shopped for clothes. Pride was a luxury we couldn't afford, but somehow she managed to keep hers intact, wearing it like armor against the world's judgment. I became good at filling the silence. I threw myself into books, into studies, into anything that would keep my mind occupied and away from the questions that had no answers. By the time I was in high school, I had built walls so high that even my mother sometimes couldn't reach me. I was polite, responsible, and completely empty inside. The anger came later in college, when I finally had the emotional vocabulary to name what I felt. It wasn't just abandonment. It was betrayal. Every birthday he missed, every graduation he didn't attend, every moment when I needed guidance and found only echoes. The anger was clean and sharp, easier to carry than the confusion and hurt that had preceded it. I met Sarah during my junior year at university. She was studying literature, and I was pursuing business administration, a practical choice that would ensure I could always provide for myself and anyone I might love. We bonded over coffee and late-night study sessions, and gradually she began to chip away at the fortress I had built around my heart. "You're afraid of being left," she said one evening, as we sat in the campus library, surrounded by textbooks and the weight of unspoken truths. It wasn't a question. I wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in my throat. She was right, of course. Every relationship I'd ever had was colored by the expectation of eventual abandonment. I dated like someone walking on thin ice, always listening for the crack that would send me plunging into the familiar cold water of rejection. But Sarah was different. She was patient in a way that didn't feel like pity, strong in a way that didn't make me feel weak. She understood that my silence wasn't indifference, but protection, that my careful distance was a learned survival mechanism. Slowly, cautiously, I began to let her in. We graduated together, found jobs in the same city, and began building the kind of life I had only seen in other people's family photos. Sarah worked as a teacher, and I climbed the corporate ladder with the methodical determination of someone who had learned early that security was something you created for yourself, not something that was given to you. 5 years later, I proposed to her on the anniversary of our first date. She cried when she said yes, and for a moment, I felt like I had finally filled the hollow place inside me. We were going to be different. We were going to be the kind of couple that lasted, the kind that other people envied. I was going to be the kind of man who stayed. The wedding planning consumed the better part of a year. Sarah threw herself into every detail with the enthusiasm of someone who had dreamed of this day since childhood. I was more practical about it, focused on the logistics and the budget, but I found myself swept up in her excitement, despite my natural tendency toward caution. My mother helped with everything she could, though her budget was still tight even after all these years. She had aged gracefully but tiredly, her hair silver now, and her hands marked by decades of hard work. She never once mentioned my father during the planning process, never suggested we might want to reach out to him, or even acknowledge his existence on our wedding day. The guest list was manageable. Sarah's large, boisterous family, and our circle of friends, plus a few colleagues and neighbors. On my side, there was my mother, and a handful of family friends who had become surrogate aunts and uncles over the years. It felt complete, this carefully curated gathering of people who had chosen to be part of our story. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect September day that seemed designed for new beginnings. I stood in the mirror of the small room behind the chapel, adjusting my tie for the 10th time, when my mother knocked on the door. "Daniel," she said, her voice carrying an unfamiliar tremor. "There's something I need to tell you." I turned to face her, and something in her expression made my stomach drop. She looked like she had seen a ghost, or maybe like she was about to create one. "He's here," she said simply. I didn't need to ask who. The hollow place inside me, the one I thought Sarah had filled, suddenly gaped open like a wound. "What do you mean he's here?" "He's in the parking lot. He wants to talk to you." 40 years. 40 years of silence, of absence, of carefully constructed explanations about why some people weren't meant to stay. And he chose today, the most important day of my life, to reappear like some unwelcome specter from a past I had worked so hard to move beyond. "I don't want to see him," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant even to my own ears. "I know," my mother said, and for the first time in my life I heard something that might have been relief in her voice. I told him that, but he said he needed to try. He said he's been trying to find the courage for years. Courage? The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Where was his courage when I was learning to ride a bike, when I was struggling with algebra, when I was trying to figure out how to be a man without any model to follow? Where was his courage during the thousands of nights when I went to bed wondering if I had done something wrong, if I was somehow unworthy of a father's love? "Tell him to leave," I said, turning back to the mirror. My hands were shaking now, and I couldn't seem to get my tie straight. "Tell him this day isn't about him." My mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "He looks like you, Daniel. Or rather, you look like him. It's unsettling." I met her eyes in the mirror, and I saw something there I had never seen before, a kind of recognition, acknowledgement of all the ways my father's absence had shaped both of us. She had spent 40 years being both mother and father to me, and now here he was, trying to claim space in a life he had never helped to build. "I'll handle it," I said, though I had no idea what that meant. She nodded and left me alone with my reflection and the weight of 4 decades of unanswered questions. I finished getting ready mechanically, my mind spinning between fury and a curious kind of emptiness. Part of me wanted to storm out to the parking lot and unleash 40 years of accumulated anger. Another part of me wanted to pretend he wasn't there, to walk down that aisle and into my new life without acknowledging the ghost of my old one. But there was a third part, a part I barely wanted to acknowledge, that was desperately curious. What did he look like now? What had he been doing all these years? Did he ever think about me? Did he ever regret leaving? Sarah appeared in the doorway, radiant in her wedding dress, and all thoughts of my father temporarily fled. She looked like something out of a fairy tale, all flowing white silk and genuine joy. This was supposed to be our day, our beginning, our chance to write a better story than the ones we had inherited. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, studying my face with the kind of attention that comes from truly knowing someone. "Something like that," I said, reaching for her hand. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you." I explained about my father, about the phone call my mother had received the night before, about the man who was apparently waiting in the parking lot for a chance to speak to the son he had abandoned. Sarah listened without interrupting, her face cycling through surprise, anger, and something that might have been compassion. "What do you want to do?" she asked when I finished. "I want to ignore him," I said. "I want to pretend he doesn't exist, the way he pretended I didn't exist for 40 years. But I don't know if I can. Not knowing that he's out there, not knowing what he wants to say." Sarah was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on my palm. "You know what I think?" she said finally. "I think you're afraid that if you see him, you'll forgive him. And you're not ready to forgive him." She was right, of course. The possibility of forgiveness terrified me more than the certainty of hatred. Hatred was clean, manageable, something I could carry without it changing who I was. Forgiveness was messy and complicated, and required a kind of strength I wasn't sure I possessed. "Whatever you decide," Sarah said. "I'm with you. If you want to see him, I'll wait. If you want to pretend he doesn't exist, I'll help you do that too." I loved her fiercely in that moment. Loved her for understanding without judgment, for offering support without trying to influence my decision. This was what partnership looked like, what love looked like when it was real and unconditional. "I need 5 minutes," I said. She nodded and kissed my cheek. "I'll be right here." I walked out of the chapel and into the parking lot, my heart hammering against my ribs. He wasn't hard to spot. He was standing by a beat-up Honda Civic, wearing an ill-fitting suit that looked like it had been purchased for this specific occasion. My mother was right. The resemblance was unsettling. He had my nose, my chin, my build. Looking at him was like looking at a preview of my own future, if my future included more gray hair and deeper lines around the eyes. He saw me coming and straightened up, his hands nervous at his sides. I stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to see the tears in his eyes, but far enough to run if I needed to. "Daniel," he said, and his voice was exactly as I remembered it, though I hadn't realized I remembered it at all. "What do you want?" I asked. I was proud of how steady my voice sounded, how controlled I appeared despite the chaos in my chest. "I wanted to—" He stopped, swallowed hard, tried again. "I wanted to see you, to tell you I'm sorry, to tell you that not a day has gone by that I haven't thought about you." "Really?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "Not a day, because I can think of about 14,000 days when you could have picked up a phone. About 14,000 days when you could have written a letter or sent a card or just existed in my life." He flinched like I had struck him, and I felt a savage satisfaction at his pain. Good. Let him hurt. Let him feel even a fraction of what I had felt. "You're right," he said. "You're absolutely right. I have no excuse. I was young and scared and stupid, and I thought you'd be better off without me." "Better off?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You thought I'd be better off believing that my father didn't love me enough to stay. You thought I'd be better off spending my entire childhood wondering what was wrong with me. There was nothing wrong with you," he said quickly. "Nothing at all. You were perfect. You were this perfect little boy who deserved so much better than what I could give you. So you gave me nothing instead?" He had no answer for that, and the silence stretched between us like a canyon. I could hear the sounds of the wedding party gathering inside the chapel, the low murmur of voices, and the soft strains of music. My life, my real life, was waiting for me inside those walls. This man, this stranger, who shared my DNA, had no place in it. "I know you probably hate me," he said finally. "I know I have no right to be here. But I needed you to know that leaving you was the biggest mistake I ever made. I needed you to know that I'm proud of you, even though I had nothing to do with who you became." "You're right," I said. "You had nothing to do with who I became. My mother did that. She did the work of 2 parents for 20 years. She's the one who earned the right to be proud of me." He nodded, tears streaming down his face now. "She's a good woman. She always was. I never deserved either of you." "No," I said, "you didn't." We stood there in the parking lot, 2 strangers connected by biology and divided by history, and I felt something shifting inside me. Not forgiveness. I wasn't ready for that. Might never be ready for that. But something else. A kind of closure, maybe. A confirmation that I had been right to build my life without him. "I should go," I said. "I'm getting married today." "I know," he said. "Congratulations. I'm sure she's wonderful." "She is," I said. "She's everything you never were." I turned to walk away, then stopped. There was one more thing I needed to say. One more truth that needed to be spoken. "I don't forgive you," I said without turning around. "I don't forgive you for leaving, and I don't forgive you for coming back. I don't forgive you for thinking that an apology could somehow make up for 40 years of absence. And I don't forgive you for choosing today to try to ease your conscience." I could hear him crying behind me, but I didn't turn around. I walked back into the chapel, back to Sarah, back to the life I had built without him. The ceremony was beautiful. Sarah radiated joy as she walked down the aisle, and I felt my heart lift as she approached. This was what mattered, not the man in the parking lot, not the ghosts of the past, but this moment, this woman, this future we were creating together. Father Murphy began the ceremony with his usual warmth and gravitas. The words washed over me like a blessing, each vow a promise not just to Sarah but to myself. I would be different. I would be the kind of man who stayed, who showed up, who loved without reservation or escape clauses. We were halfway through the exchange of vows when I saw him. He had somehow made his way inside the chapel and was standing at the very back, half hidden, behind a pillar. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and for a moment, the ceremony faded into background noise. He looked older up close, more fragile than he had seemed in the parking lot. His suit was cheap but clean, his shoes polished to a shine that couldn't quite hide their age. He was trying so hard to be invisible, to take up as little space as possible, that it was almost heartbreaking. Almost. I felt Sarah's hand squeeze mine, and I turned back to her, back to the promises we were making, back to the life we were choosing. Whatever my father thought he was doing here, whatever closure he thought he might find, it had nothing to do with me. I had already given him all the attention he was going to get. "Do you, Daniel, take Sarah to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Father Murphy asked, his voice carrying the weight of ceremony and tradition. "I do," I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. When it came time for the kiss, I pulled Sarah close and let the rest of the world disappear. The applause of our friends and family, the soft light streaming through the stained glass windows, the joy on my mother's face, all of it combined into a perfect moment that belonged entirely to us. The reception was held at a small venue downtown. Nothing fancy but warm and intimate. Sarah danced with her father, and I danced with my mother, and for a few hours I managed to forget about the uninvited guest who had tried to insert himself into our celebration. But forgetting, I learned, was different from not seeing. He was there, hovering at the edges of the party like a specter, never approaching, but never leaving. I would catch glimpses of him through the crowd, always keeping his distance, always watching with an expression I couldn't quite read. During the dinner, my mother leaned over and whispered, "He's still here." "I know," I said. "Do you want me to ask him to leave?" I considered it. It would be easy enough to have him removed, to ban him from this celebration of everything he had never been part of. But something held me back. Not kindness, exactly, but a kind of weary resignation. "Let him stay," I said. "As long as he doesn't try to approach me." My mother nodded, understanding passing between us without words. She had spent 40 years protecting me from his absence. Now she was protecting me from his presence. The evening wore on, filled with speeches and laughter, and the kind of joy that comes from being surrounded by people who genuinely love you. Sarah's father spoke about the kind of man he hoped I would be to his daughter, and I felt the weight of that expectation settle on my shoulders like a mantle. I would be worthy of it, I promised myself. I would be the kind of husband and father that my own father had never been. Near the end of the evening, as the last guests were saying their goodbyes, and the cleanup was beginning, I found myself alone for a moment on the venue's small balcony. The city lights twinkled below, and I could hear the distant sound of traffic and life continuing its eternal rhythm. "Daniel!" I turned to find him standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the warm light from inside. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of the evening and the accumulated years. "I asked you not to approach me," I said. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you one more thing before I go." I waited, my arms crossed, my expression carefully neutral. "You look like your mother when you smile," he said. "But you have my stubborn streak. I can see it in the way you hold yourself, the way you set your jaw when you're angry. I'm sorry you inherited that from me. Is that supposed to mean something to me?" I asked. "No," he said quietly. "I guess not. I wanted you to know that I see you. I see the man you've become, and I'm proud of you. I know I have no right to be proud, but I am. Your pride means nothing to me," I said. "It's 40 years too late and worth exactly as much as your apology." He nodded, accepting the blow without flinching. I know it doesn't change anything. I just needed to say it." "Well, you've said it," I said. "Now you can go." He stood there for a moment longer, and I thought I saw him starting to reach out, as if he might try to touch my shoulder or shake my hand. But then he caught himself, let his hand fall back to his side. "I'll go now," he said. "I won't bother you again." "Good," I said, though the word felt hollow even as I spoke it. He turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think you're going to be a wonderful husband. And someday, when you're ready, you'll be a wonderful father too." The words hit me like a physical blow, partly because they were exactly what I needed to hear, and partly because they came from the one person who had no right to say them. I wanted to lash out, to tell him that he knew nothing about me, nothing about what kind of man I would be, but the words stuck in my throat, and by the time I could breathe again, he was gone. I stood on that balcony for a long time, watching the city lights blur through tears I hadn't realized were falling. Sarah found me there eventually, slipping her arms around my waist and leaning her head against my back. "How are you doing?" she asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. I thought I would feel different afterward. I thought confronting him would give me some kind of closure. And it didn't. It just made everything more complicated. He's not the monster I've been carrying around in my head all these years. He's just a weak man who made a terrible choice and spent 40 years living with the consequences. Does that make it easier or harder? I thought about it, really thought about it. "Harder," I said finally. "It would be easier if he were a monster. Monsters don't deserve forgiveness. And weak men do. I don't know," I said. "I honestly don't know." Sarah was quiet for a moment, just holding me in the soft darkness. "You know what I think?" she said finally. "I think forgiveness isn't about what someone deserves. It's about what you need to be free." "I'm not ready," I said. "I know," she said. "And that's okay. You don't have to be ready today or tomorrow or ever. But maybe someday you will be, and when that day comes, you'll know." We went home that night as husband and wife, carrying the weight of the day's joy and complications in equal measure. As we lay in bed, Sarah's head on my chest, I thought about the man who had stood in the parking lot and at the back of the chapel, the man who had spent 40 years living with the consequences of one terrible decision. I thought about the child I had been, the one who had waited and wondered and eventually stopped hoping. I thought about the man I had become, shaped by absence and determination in equal measure. And I thought about the husband I was now, the father I might someday be. The years that followed were good ones. Sarah and I built a life together that was everything I had dreamed of. And more. We traveled. We laughed. We fought. And made up. And grew into each other in the way that couples do when they're truly committed to the long haul. I threw myself into work with renewed energy, climbing the corporate ladder with a combination of natural ability and fierce determination. Success came easier than I had expected, and with it came a kind of confidence I had never possessed before. I was good at what I did, and more importantly, I was good at being a husband. Sarah continued teaching, her classroom becoming a second home, where she nurtured other people's children with the same fierce love she would someday give to our own. Watching her with her students, seeing the way she could reach even the most difficult kids, I began to understand what it meant to have a calling, rather than just a job. 3 years into our marriage, Sarah came home from the doctor with news that changed everything. She was pregnant, glowing with the kind of joy that transforms a person from the inside out. I was terrified and elated in equal measure, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what we were undertaking. "Are you ready for this?" she asked as we sat in our kitchen, the pregnancy test between us like a small plastic promise. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't know anything about being a father. None of us do," she said. "We just figure it out as we go along." But I knew it was more complicated than that for me. I had no template for fatherhood, no model to follow or reject. I would have to create my own version from scratch, and the responsibility of that felt enormous. The pregnancy was smooth and uneventful. 9 months of wonder and worry and preparation. We painted the nursery together, assembled the crib, read every parenting book we could find. I found myself studying other fathers at the grocery store, at the park, anywhere I could observe the small interactions between parent and child. Sarah's father became an unexpected mentor during this time, sharing stories of his own early days as a father, offering advice that was both practical and profound. "The secret," he told me one evening as we sat on his back porch, "is just to show up. Kids don't need you to be perfect. They just need you to be there. Show up." It seemed so simple, and yet it was the one thing my own father had never been able to do. Our daughter was born on a Tuesday morning in March, after 12 hours of labor that tested every limit of my emotional endurance. Watching Sarah go through that process, seeing the strength and determination she displayed, I fell in love with her, all over again. Emma Rose Patterson came into the world at 6:47 a.m., weighing 7 pounds and 2 ounces, with Sarah's eyes and what the nurses claimed was my stubborn chin. The moment they placed her in my arms, I understood something fundamental about love that I had never grasped before. This was what my father had walked away from. This tiny, perfect person who depended on me for everything, who looked at me with complete trust and unconditional love. This was what he had chosen to abandon. And for the first time in my life, I felt something approaching pity for him. Because how could anyone walk away from this? How could anyone choose to miss this? The first few months of Emma's life were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. I learned to change diapers, to warm bottles, to soothe her when she cried. I learned the difference between her hungry cry and her tired cry, the way she liked to be held when she was fussy, the songs that would calm her down. But more than that, I learned what it meant to love someone more than yourself. Every day with Emma was a revelation, a new understanding of the depths of parental love. And every day, I became more and more angry at my father for choosing to miss this with me. Sarah noticed my changing mood, the way I would sometimes stare at Emma with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What are you thinking about?" she asked one evening, as I held Emma while she slept. "My father," I said. "I keep thinking about everything he missed, everything he chose to miss. Are you thinking about reaching out to him?" "No," I said quickly. "No, I'm not. I'm thinking about how much I hate him for not being here, for not knowing his granddaughter, for not knowing what he lost when he walked away." Sarah was quiet for a moment, studying my face. "Daniel," she said gently, "this anger is going to eat you alive if you let it." "I know," I said, "but I don't know how to let it go." "Maybe you don't have to let it go," she said. "Maybe you just have to learn to carry it differently." I didn't understand what she meant then, but I would learn. Over the months that followed, as Emma grew and changed and became more herself every day, I began to understand that my anger was really grief in disguise. I was grieving for the relationship I had never had, for the grandfather Emma would never know, for the father I had needed and never found. But I was also discovering something else. I was good at being a father. Not perfect, certainly, but good. I was patient when Emma was fussy, gentle when she was scared, playful when she was happy. I showed up for every feeding, every diaper change, every tiny milestone. I was nothing like my father, and that realization brought its own kind of peace. Emma's first birthday party was held in our backyard, a small celebration with family and close friends. As I watched her smash cake with her tiny fists, heard her giggle at the attention, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. We had made it through the first year, and she was thriving. My mother, now a grandmother who doted on Emma with the fierce love she had once reserved for me, pulled me aside during the party. "You're a wonderful father," she said, her eyes bright with pride, and something that might have been relief. "I'm trying to be," I said. "You are," she said firmly. "You're everything he wasn't, and everything Emma needs." Later that night, after the guests had gone home and Emma was asleep in her crib, I found myself thinking about my father again, not with the sharp anger that had characterized my thoughts for so long, but with a kind of distant curiosity. Where was he now? Did he ever think about me? Did he know he had a granddaughter? I had changed my name when I got married, taking Sarah's maiden name as my own, in a symbolic rejection of my father's legacy. Emma's birth certificate listed me as Daniel Patterson, not Daniel Morrison. My father's name would end with him, and I found a bitter satisfaction in that fact. But as the months passed and Emma grew more interesting and interactive, I began to wonder if there was something cruel about keeping them apart. Not for his sake, but for hers. Every child deserved to know their family history, even the complicated parts. The decision was made for me on a Thursday evening in November. I was getting out of my car in the driveway when I saw him standing across the street, leaning against a lamppost like he had been waiting for hours. He looked older, more frail than he had at the wedding. But he was unmistakably the same man. My first instinct was to call the police. My second was to march over there and tell him to leave and never come back. But something in his posture, in the way he held himself, made me pause. He looked like a man who had nothing left to lose. "What are you doing here?" I called across the street. "I was hoping to see her," he said. "My granddaughter. I was hoping to see her just once." "Absolutely not," I said. "You have no right to be here." "I know," he said. "I know I have no right to anything, but I heard you had a daughter, and I thought maybe what? That I would forget the last 40 years because you suddenly decided you want to be a grandfather." He shook his head. No, I didn't think that. I wanted to see her. I wanted to know what she looks like." I stared at him across the street, this man who had caused me so much pain, who had shaped my entire life through his absence. He looked broken, hollowed out by years of regret and loneliness. And for the first time in my life, I felt something other than anger when I looked at him. "She looks like Sarah," I said finally. "She has her mother's eyes." "And your stubborn chin?" he asked, and I caught the ghost of a smile. "So they tell me." We stood there in the growing darkness, two men connected by blood and divided by history, and something shifted between us. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but acknowledgement. He was Emma's grandfather, whether I liked it or not. She was his granddaughter, whether he deserved her or not. "I'm not going to let you hurt her," I said. "I wouldn't," he said quickly. "I would never hurt her. You hurt me," I said. "You hurt me every day for 40 years. "I know," he said, and his voice was barely a whisper. "I know I did. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Daniel." I wanted to stay angry. Anger was familiar, manageable, something I could control. But standing there in the street, where my daughter would someday play, where she would learn to ride her first bike and have her first heartbreak, I felt something else creeping in. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the beginning of understanding. "She's beautiful," I said. "She's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "I'm sure she is," he said. "She's lucky to have you as a father." "Yes," I said. "She is." He nodded, accepting the truth of it without argument. "I should go," he said. "I didn't mean to upset you. I needed to see where she lives. I needed to know that she's safe and loved." "She is," I said. "She's both of those things." He turned to leave, then paused. "Daniel," he said, "I know this doesn't change anything, but I want you to know that I'm proud of the man you've become. I'm proud of the father you are. I had nothing to do with either of those things, but I'm proud anyway." "Thank you," I said, and was surprised to find that I meant it. He walked away then, disappearing into the darkness, and I was left standing in my driveway with a head full of questions and a heart full of confusion. Inside the house I could hear Emma crying, and I went to her, lifted her from her crib, and held her close. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered into her soft hair. "Daddy's here. Daddy's always going to be here." And in that moment, holding my daughter close, I understood something I had never grasped before. My father's absence had wounded me, but it had also taught me something invaluable. The importance of showing up, of being present, of choosing love over fear, commitment over convenience. I would never be the father who left. I would never be the man who walked away. I would be the father who stayed, who showed up, who loved without reservation or condition. The years that followed brought their own challenges and joys. Emma grew into a bright, curious child who filled our house with laughter and chaos in equal measure. Sarah and I navigated the complexities of parenting together, learning as we went, making mistakes and celebrating victories. I never saw my father again, though I sometimes wondered if he was still out there, still thinking about the granddaughter he would never know. The anger I had carried for so long began to fade, replaced by a kind of indifference that felt almost like peace. Emma was 5 when she first asked about her grandfather. We were looking through old photo albums, and she noticed that all the pictures of me as a child included only my mother. "Where's your daddy?" she asked with the directness that only children possess. "He went away when